Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Awesome. We're just going to wait another minute or two, but now I didn't get too many questions for the Q&A this morning. I had a few, but if you guys have any last minute questions, go ahead and type them in the chat and I'll get to them before we get started on our critiques. Did it stop streaming? No. Did it go blank? I just moved the iPad to see if it could be just, it's fine? Okay. There's a little bit of a delay between when I'm speaking and when the message is getting through to you guys, so I just wanted to make sure everything's working okay. Okay, so just real quick, one of the questions I had was just about how to take pictures for your drawing. Hold on just a second. Linda, can you hear me now? It shows the audio coming through on my end. Thanks, Kayla. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just start talking a little bit. Yeah, try refreshing your browser if you're having a little bit of trouble with the audio or video. There was a little bit of a lag on my end, so you might be trying to catch up. Okay, so there was a question about how to take pictures, and while this isn't a photography class, I know a few of you had questions about how to take photographs for your own reference. So I put together a little guide just from a few resources that I often refer to on the internet. And so I pulled those into a little PDF and I just posted it on the Facebook page, but it's also going to be in the download section for this week's videos, which are now live, and you guys can go after our live session and you can watch the new content. So it's just a quick guide going over different types of lighting. And well, this one was kind of geared more towards photographers and photography lighting. You know, lighting for art is just a little bit different. I mean, at least personally, I like a lot of contrast. You know, your focus should be usually a single light source. You can have two light sources, for example, a rim light coming from behind the model, lighting up the hair, and then a frontal light. But since a lot of you've had questions, I just put this little document together real quick so that you guys can take a look over it and ask any questions you might have. It also goes a little bit over, f-stops and that sort of stuff. It gets a little technical, but you can really get control over even the most basic camera, even if you're using your phone. The main thing is controlling your exposure and your light source. And you don't need fancy lighting equipment. You can use a natural light window. You can use just a light bulb in like a clamp light. I use an LED light. It's a video recording light, but it's what I paint under because the temperature is pretty balanced on it. I can post a link to the lights that I like in our Facebook page later. Oh, good, Nora, you have audio now. It could have been that there was a little bit of a delay. So you can back up a little bit and listen to what I was just talking about with the photography. So anyhow, that quick little guide, there's 4 main types of lighting that I used for our photo references. That was and that had more to do with the lighting angle. I used Rembrandt lighting, butterfly lighting, and loop lighting. And the names for those basically is just associated with the light shapes and shadow shapes on the face. So with Rembrandt lighting, it's named after Rembrandt because he was pretty famous for having that little triangle of light on the shadow side of the cheek. So that's considered Rembrandt lighting. Loop lighting is where the cast shadow under the nose creates a little bit of a loop shape off to the side, like a little U shape. And then butterfly lighting is where the light is almost directly above the model and it creates a little bit of a butterfly shape under the cast shadow, or for the cast shadow underneath the nose. It's usually pretty much directly above the model. So anyhow, you'll see those covered in the little handout. Another question I got was more about having finding a way to find structure in your practice as an artist, and this kind of a generic question about what does it really take? Is it, just if you haven't had any formal training, what does it take beyond just practice and to really kind of push yourself? And really, there's not much more to it than just sitting down and doing the work. You can study all the theory in the world, and if you don't sit there and actually apply it and practice and make a lot of mistakes, you're not really going to advance and learn. So as far as learning how to set a practice, that comes down to self-discipline and scheduling time. If you work full-time or part-time even, scheduling intentional time for study. And classes are a great way to do that, partly because you've paid for the class and you're kind of obligated to yourself to attend and put the work in. That's a great way to establish accountability, but plus you're learning. But really, if you don't, you could listen to an entire class, but if you don't sit down and do the work, you're not going to see the practical application and the improvement that you would if you just sat down and practiced every day. So my recommendation is set a schedule as often as you can. I know after a long day of work, sometimes the last thing we want to do is go home and do more work or struggle with the drawing. Try to find a way to think of it as a relaxing time, and whether it's an hour a day just sketching in your sketchbook, or carry a sketchbook with you and doodle while you're waiting in line. If you have a really busy schedule, just find ways to fit it into your daily life, and you'll see improvement, guaranteed. It's really just, you have to just sit and do it. It's like anything else. You don't just learn the piano by learning to sight read notes. You have to sit there and practice scales and do the exercises so that you can later on play a full piece of music. Drawing is the same way. So Nate, you had a tag-on question to working after work. Any tips to not obsess over minor details? Yeah, it's easy to get too zoomed in on what you're doing. A lot of that just takes practice to remind yourself to see the big picture. You know, a lot of the exercise that, you know, so far in the class, we've really focused on big picture ideas. We did spend one session going into the details of the features, but everything else has been geared towards setting yourself up for the end stage of the drawing, which we're about to get into. So a few tips just while you're working. Stand up while you work at an easel and set a reminder or a timer on your phone to step back every 5 minutes, step away from your drawing and look at it from a distance. That makes a huge difference, and it keeps you from getting too much into detail. Also, you know, you could try being conscious of how close you're standing to your drawing just as you work. I try to stand close to arm's length. Sometimes I need to get in a little closer, but if you try and stand a little bit more at arm's length, you'll keep a bigger focus. Try wine. Funny, Hugh. It can help if you feel really tense, but drawing shouldn't be a tense thing for you. You know, it's okay to make mistakes. Of course, we all want to improve, but how we improve is by making mistakes. You know, I had to make a lot of failed, quote unquote, failed drawings or bad drawings before I started making good drawings. And every artist will tell you that. It's just a matter of doing. And yeah, getting obsessed over the minor details. It's a matter of practicing those initial block-ins. So instead of making your goal when you sit down to draw, instead of making your goal to have a finished looking drawing, try saying, okay, tonight I'm going to exercise the block-in. I'm going to do 3 head block-ins just up to the linear, you know, feature stage, and I'm just going to practice my shapes. You know, give yourself an intention for the day. It doesn't always have to be a finished work of art. A lot of the work is in the beginning of the drawing anyway, as you guys have clearly learned so far in our class. We've spent so much time just focusing on the beginning stages of the drawing, and it's because it's the most important stage of the drawing. Did that answer your question, Nate? Yeah, and you know, Nate, when it comes to making measurements, you know, I've taught a lot of different techniques for drawing, including sight size, and you know, it's important to try to find the essential marks that you need to make, you know, and not get into too many small dots because it can start to look like connect the dots. And it can also confuse you more than help you. So, you know, try if you could limit how many points that you're marking down. Let's just say overall width, overall height of, you know, the width of the cheekbone, width of the jaw, width of the temple, and then the height of the head. You know, that's all you really need to get the face shape, you know, rather than going in and trying to mark all of those around. So there was another question I had. Does the toning and rendering process that's going to be taught in the class work well with the full figure? So when it comes to figure drawing, I mean, that would be an entire course in itself just because there's so much more involved. But yes, the techniques here that I've taught in this class can be applied to anything. You know, the face shape and the way we look at shapes in the abstraction, it can be applied to still life, it can be applied to full figure drawing, really anything. The fundamental concepts that I emphasize in the class, yes, we're learning about anatomy and planes and things specific to portraiture, but things like the measuring techniques, the toning techniques, and you know, taking comparative measurements, those can apply to any subject matter, whether it's a pet portrait or, you know, a still life or full figure drawing. So those raw basic concepts that are really fundamental to the process, those can be applied to anything. And yes, the toning techniques that we are getting into can be applied to any of these subjects as well. So that was it for the questions. Are there any last minute questions before we dive in? I know some of you were having a little trouble with the nitrum charcoal. One of you actually asked if you could use powdered charcoal, which I sent out a little message with answers to those questions, specifically about using powdered charcoal or switching to vine if your nitrum is not kind of laying down heavy enough, or if it's too hard of a pencil. Yes, I've used charcoal powder. When I work large, I tend to use charcoal powder. I just didn't want to introduce it in this class because it is very messy and hard to control, and it's easy to lose your drawing using the charcoal powder to fill in the first layer of tone. So if you are wanting to experiment with charcoal powder, or you want to use the shaving powder from your nitrum, you can save it in a little jar. Just use your bristle brush, lay your drawing flat. You don't want to do this upright. And then you dip your brush in the powder and you just rub it into the shadow. You can also use a chamois cloth to do that as well, or in small areas I like to use Q-tips. Those work great. But like I said, it's a little bit harder to control, so I recommend, and it doesn't tend to stick as much because you aren't pushing the charcoal pencil into it, you're using the brush, so it doesn't tend to go down as dark. It takes quite a bit of powder, but I do work with that method, and whenever I do larger figure drawings, I have a couple that are about 4 foot tall. I tend to use the powder because it's much quicker, and I'll use it to create like large areas of tone for the background and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into, it doesn't look like anyone has any further questions. Let's get into the critiques. I know there's a few people who couldn't submit this week. You had things come up, and that's fine. Just if you want a little feedback. This week wasn't a huge week in terms of amount of information. We just toned in our flat values. So you can send me your drawings by email, and I'll give you any suggestions that I see if you weren't able to turn in your work for this live crit. So, all right, Jackie, are you with us? Hi, Jackie. Really nice job on your toning. I like how simple you kept it. You did indicate a little separation between the hair value and the face value, and that's fine because you didn't get into too much detail, and it looks really good. A few suggestions that I had, it's a really minor one, but I noticed that here, the tilt of the nose right here is just a little off. I'm gonna actually switch my color to black so it's a little easier to see. So notice that the nose kind of straightened out, and all of your other features are on this kind of tilt. So I would just re-examine. I felt like this distance was too short, but I actually think it's okay if you lift the right side nostril. So just double check that your tilts are parallel to the eyes and the mouth. When I zoom out, you can see the difference there. It's really minor, but that will help. And also, I just noticed that here in the corner, left corner of her hair, it was just a little bit sharp, and on her, it's just a little bit softer and a little more natural. So I would just fill that in a little bit. Other than that, you're really set up for success. I'm really happy with the drawing. Your shadow shapes were spot on, and all of your other features looked great. When you get into toning, I would look at this corner of the white of the eye. It just feels a teeny bit small, but it could just be that the shadow is created by the lash line in here, and it's kind of shrinking it. So just re-examine that area. But other than that, great job, and I think you're ready for the next stage. the new videos are up, so we go into actually the hair first. There was an entire video on just how to draw the texture of hair. Be sure to look in the downloads section, everyone, too, because there's a couple of diagrams and handouts and step-by-steps for hair and just laying down charcoal as well. But did you have any questions, Jackie, before I move on? You did a great job. Okay. Oh, that's okay. No problem. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, really nice job. All right, Truong, are you with us? If you're not, or if you are, really nice job. Simple tones, nice flat values. One of my suggestions, and I'm not sure which paper you're using, I think you mentioned that you were using the Strathmore sketch paper. Sometimes, if any of you are using that, I actually bought that paper thinking it was going to be perfect for charcoal, and I had a lot of trouble getting my charcoal to stick to it. I bought a giant roll so I could do oversized drawings, and I can't use it. I can't get the charcoal to behave on it. So if your drawing is on that paper, you might be struggling a little bit with the materials. One thing I would suggest is to take the area in the hair, maybe use a chamois or even a cotton rag, and just smooth out some of that hair texture, so that way when you watch the video on drawing the hair, you're not fighting some of that inherent texture from that paper. It looks like maybe the nitrum was having a little bit of trouble sticking, so you could try switching to a vine, but like I said, if you're using that Strathmore sketch paper, it's great for pencil and some of the other mediums, but it really doesn't like charcoal. I've tried it, so but you did a great job on your little value study. I do feel like it could go a little darker on the left side, but I think it has to do more with the paper than what you're doing. So if you're wanting to switch papers, I know some of you had already started drawings and you're like, I don't have the right paper. You know, there is a way to transfer your existing drawing onto a new sheet of paper. Just take a piece of tracing paper over your drawing, draw your lines very lightly in pencil, coat the back of that paper with the nitrum charcoal and rub it in with your fingers. It just needs a light coating, and then you lay it on your new sheet of paper and lightly trace. Just careful not to press too hard so you don't create grooves in your paper underneath. And you should be able to transfer it to a new sheet of paper. There's no problem if you want to do that if you're struggling with the toning on the paper that you're using. If you have any questions on how to do that, just let me know. So here are some of my suggestions. So actually, this is a suggestion for most people who did a profile view. Because you're working profile and the light is coming from the front this way, you're going to be applying white in this area. However, depending on the value of your paper, if you're starting on a really dark gray paper, you're probably going to be okay. But because this paper is so pale, that white is not going to have as much impact as you need it to. So what I recommend is toning a little bit, at least towards the front of the face for now. You don't have to tone the entire background, but tone a little bit of the face in front, just right around you, like about as much as you see here, all the way down, and then, you know, smudge it in. You can use the vine just to start, and that way it'll give you the appropriate contrast that you need when we start going into the white. And it'll also help you when you're working in your shadow areas, because you're going to have that dark value to compare it to. And some of you said that you weren't able to find the exact color or paper that I recommended. And so if your paper is lighter, you might find that you need to add a little bit of tone in the back. I don't usually do that, but it depends. If I'm working on a lighter paper, maybe I will. And it's mostly important for this profile view. The 3/4 view, her hair comes in front and provides that dark contrast behind the face on the light side, so it's not, you know, as necessary. So a few suggestions I had for this one is just to re-examine the shadow shapes that you chose to lay in. And the main reason for that, and I know it's kind of tough because the lighting is coming in at a really sharp angle and it's hitting these areas pretty bright, but the shadow shapes here shouldn't all connect all the way down to the bridge of the nose. They kind of cap off here, and this is more of a dark mid-tone. It doesn't mean you really need to erase this, it's just that you need to make these shapes a little bit darker. So you can see the shape here, it kind of comes up around and then joins with the cast shadow shape. And then just watch the height of that little light shape on the wing of the nostril. It needs to go up a little bit. Your placement of the nose is good. And then a little more of a cast shadow from the lashes there. And then down here in the mouth, just make sure you make this shape big enough. So here is the opening of the mouth, and then she has a cast shadow underneath it. So it makes this width pretty wide, and a lot of people had made that maybe a little narrow. So just re-examine that and make sure you push that shadow shape up a little bit there. Okay, so that was it. Really nice job. Oh, and then just look at the width here of where the hair comes forward. Real small change, but it'll feel a little more natural because the jump between here and here makes me expect to see the full ear here, and then I don't, so I think I would just bring the hair forward a little bit on that. Okay, really nice job, and yeah, you're ready to move on to the next stage. I don't think he's with us, so if you have any questions, just send me an email. Susan, are you with us, Susan? Oh, there you are. Okay, yeah, nice drawing. I like your simplicity of the tones, and yeah, you did exactly what we needed, just keeping the simple flat shapes. You did decipher a little bit of a difference between the hair shape and the face shape, and that's fine because you didn't go too dark. In the next video, you're going to see how we render out the hair, and you'll be adding more dark tone, but you didn't go too dark. You'll still should be able to erase your highlights for the hair. I just had a few minor suggestions for your shadow shapes on the face. The first one is, I know we had talked about this eye here being a little bit hard to see, especially this inner corner. And so what I think is happening is it's concealed in shadow, but in your drawing it feels like the eye is a little small. So just as a future note, you don't need to necessarily draw this in yet, but when you start going in to detail the shadow shapes in our second video for this week, maybe sketch in a little bit where this upper lid is here and right here, and then make sure you indicate that inner tear duct shape and bring it far enough over to the left. My other suggestion was just to open up this light shape a little bit more. The main reason is this area here is actually mid-tone. It's a very dark mid-tone, but we need space to transition to the paper value. And if you use this and then we're transitioning to the paper value, it's going to leave very little room for white, and it's going to close off that shape just a little too much. So when I place this, I try to look for the middle of the core shadow, not necessarily 100% on the edge. The only place I really put on right on the edge of the shadow is cast shadows, because they're a little bit sharper. But where edge forms are softer, I tend to try and draw my line or end my shadow right in the middle of that core shadow so that I have room to transition. And then down here at the bottom, I just felt like the shadow needed to come down a little bit. It's really minor, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But same thing with the chin here. This area is more of a mid-tone, so just make sure when you go in and darken your shadow, place your core shadow here. This one I would like kind of dab off the edge here so it's not so sharp of an ending, but you could leave some of the tone right in this area. Just take your kneaded eraser and kind of tap away some of the tone so that you have a softer edge there. And then when you go in and draw in your deeper core shadow with the charcoal pencil, place it right here. All right, does that make any sense? Welcome, Johnny. So, Susan, do you have any questions? You did a really nice job. I can't wait to see your drawing develop. We're getting into the fun part now, guys. We're going to start toning and making our drawings look real. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right, perfect, Susan. Yeah, good job. And if any questions pop up after you watch the new videos and you're working, just, of course, send me an email or message me on Facebook. Okay, Nora, it's your turn. Are you with us, Nora? I think I saw you in here. All right. Nice job. Your drawing's looking really good. Your shapes are spot on. Your value's good. I know you said you had a little trouble getting a good picture. It's a little fuzzy, but I can work with this. Don't worry. Is your paper really this light? Is it kind of like a cream color? Oh, okay. It's just coming across that way in the photo. Okay. Good. All right. I was just wondering because if people who are working on a lighter paper might have to add more mid-tone, a little further out and less white. It really depends on where your paper sits on the value scale. So, yeah, good. I just was wondering because of the picture. So I really didn't have any suggestions for your shadow shapes. The placement of your shadows is perfect. The only suggestion I actually had here was in the foreshortening of this eye on the right. I would just open up that lid a little bit by pushing this lash line down. You can just do that when you move into the dark charcoal and we talk about toning those shadow shapes. It's really minor, but I think it'll help with this matching the foreshortening on the left eye. So just work on pushing that down a little bit. Here, I'll show you what it looks like without. It's a little more open, and there it's a little more closed. There might still be a dark tone here because her lashes are pretty thick, but just make sure that where you put the really darkest emphasis is right where I placed that line. And then my only suggestions here is the width here felt a little big, and so I would just bring that cheekbone in. If you look at your reference and you drop a straight line down, you'll notice that her cheekbone sits a little bit back from the brow bone. So just pull that back a little bit and then just round out the forehead here at the top. She's a little more full through here. It's really, really small amount though, so I would focus more on these two areas here at the top rather than worry too much about the lower left. It's mostly just because on this foreshortened view we have the fullness here that should be kind of pushing out there. Okay, so yeah, really good job. Do you have any questions? I know, oftentimes those are the areas we keep noodling. I'll send everyone their edits, so you'll have your new photo to refer to when you're making corrections and moving into the next stage. But as you can see, in each critique, we've had fewer and fewer and fewer corrections because we've spent so much time on this underdrawing. We're really kind of inching you guys towards, you know, just the right place so that when we get into the tone, it's pretty much going to be focused on getting, you know, rendering out shades and different values and that sort of thing. So there won't be many major drawing corrections so long as you stick to this drawing and you don't alter it too much as you work. So did you have any questions, Nora? Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad you're loving the critiques. All right, if anything pops up as you're working, just send me an email or message me on Facebook in our group or anything. And all right, you're welcome. All right, Linda, you're up. I think I saw you in here earlier. You were having some audio issues. Can you hear me okay? All right, perfect. All right, so good job on your toning. Your shapes look really, really nice. Good value choice for the mid-tone. I know you were messaging me with a couple of issues with the charcoal handling on the paper. It looks like you worked through some of that. So I just had a few suggestions before we develop the drawing further with the dark tones. Down here in the lower jaw is the main one. I can't tell if when you toned the dark shape here, if it just kind of got lost into the hair shape, but her jaw is a little bit more full and square on these corners. So it looks like you have the left side pretty well in place. It's just the right side. I would just work on that only where you see the lines. And then this space in here is the main shadow shape. It's really small on this view. The shadow shapes are not as big. This is that butterfly lighting that I mentioned earlier. You can see here underneath the nose, there's that kind of butterfly shape. Well, they call it that. It's just basically a symmetrical shape. So yeah, that's my main suggestion, is working on getting that width to her jawline here. And then Your shadow shape, your cast shadow underneath the nose needs to just be a little bigger. It takes up a lot of space on the muzzle here. So just take another look at that and make that a little bit bigger. And same thing with the upper lip. It's not that her upper lip needs to be bigger, it's just there is a predominant shadow shape on the upper lip. If you remember, the lips in profile are actually an underplane. So let me just draw over here. You know, looking in profile, the lips here are typically turned under. The bottom lip faces up and usually gets more light. You will have a little bit of light in the lip, usually right where this part puckers out. It's like a little ball. So you'll get a little bit of light towards the top. Of course, if your light's coming head on, you'll get light on both planes. But in this lighting situation where the light's coming from above, you're going to have a little more of a shadow on that underplane, or on that underplane of the top lip. And then just make this shadow shape under the bottom lip a little bit bigger, a little wider. Really, really small changes though. The only other thing I noticed was here in the eyes, and let me take this away. It's mostly that the left eye feels a little bit smaller than the right eye, and part of that has to do with the irises. The size of the irises got a little big. I think yours is about that position. So you just need to shave off a little bit on the left side of each one, and that should do it. Let me erase those marks. And then I would just check. It seems like your overall widths are fine for the eye, but her lash line kind of continues a little bit past. There's usually a little bit of an overlap here, so I would just add that little extension there when you're toning. And then just make sure that your shadow shapes on the underplanes of the eye, that's where you also have a pretty major shadow plane, and I would make that just a little bit bigger. As far as this plane here, I know it looks like a shadow, but it's more of a mid-tone, so what I would suggest is you can leave this tone here, but I would just soften this edge here a little bit. You can either do that with a brush, or you can just take your kneaded eraser and just tap along the edge and remove some of the material. And I would say the same thing for this one. Just make sure your darkest shadow is down in these areas, and that this is more of a transition turning towards the light. Okay, and that was it. I mean, you did a really nice job. Your tones and the simplicity of the tones and the shapes are really good. Just work on some of those suggestions. Do you have any questions, Linda? Yeah, I lost the jawline when doing the values. And the lip and main shadow on the jawline, same value as the neck. Lost on the eyes too. Yeah, so typically when I'm laying in my base tone, for example, here in the neck, like in this area, I try to aim this main value that I lay down first somewhere around the value of my reflected lights. So the areas that you see as a little bit lighter within the shadow mask. The reason is from here forward, we're actually just going to go darker. We're just going to be adding more tone. It's not necessarily a subtractive method for getting those reflected lights lighter. We're going to make them look lighter by adding more dark. So when you first start out, all of your values, like in here and here, everything should be the same value as your main value that you first lay down. When we get into the charcoal pencil and rendering those shadows, you might or might not need to add more dark to the smaller areas, but something to pay attention to when you're toning small areas of shadow that are surrounded by large areas of light, typically those shadows are not going to be as dark. They will have contrast, but there will be a little more reflected light because it's surrounded by light, and you won't need to push it as dark because of that contrast of the light surrounding it. It's going to look dark kind of much sooner because it's surrounded in light. Whereas if you took an area that was like within the shadow mask, let's say here to here, there isn't that much contrast in this area, so you're really going to have to push this darker to get a distinction between the two. But when you're working in a small light shadow mask, like up here in the eye socket, not only is there going to be light bouncing into this underplane here from over here, it's also surrounded by light. So to get that to look dark, you're not going to actually have to go very dark on the value scale. Does that make sense, Linda? No, no, you're not too dark. You're just where you need to be. Yeah, it's easy when you're toning in the value stage to feel like you're losing some of your drawing. So when that happens, or if I know I'm going to be toning an area between like neck and the hair or the face and the hair, what I'll do is take my charcoal pencil and lightly outline where my contour is so I don't lose the line, and then I'll tone in, and I should be able to still see it through that tone. So you could use a charcoal pencil to indicate these areas again if you need to. But that's all I had for suggestions. So do you have any questions, Linda? Yeah, yeah. It's, working on the tone paper, it's going to be a little easier. Um, it has its own unique challenges, but because we're starting at a mid-tone and we're working out, so we work first to the darks, and then we work more, into the lights at the later stages. Once you kind of understand the process start to finish, it'll be easier for you to practice. And if you're wanting to just kind of jump ahead and kind of get a feel for it, do the little poster study, and also you could even render like a ball or a basic shape, an egg, using the value tones and trying to render it out. The main rule of thumb that I tend to go by is that your reflected lights, so that's like areas within the shadow mask where the light's bouncing in and illuminating. So for example, underneath the jaw, you'll see a little bit of that. Or you're going to see quite a bit of it in here. Those values should always be darker than your darkest midtone. So your reflected light should always be a shade darker than your midtone, or your, towards the darker midtone. So as you're transitioning to the shadow, that will help keep it separate from the light mass. All of these midtones here over, from this shadow edge over, are considered light mass. Everything from this shadow edge down or under and into the shadow is considered a shadow mass, even though you might have something that looks lighter within that. So by categorizing that, you have shadow mass and light mass. That's what we're doing here, and that's what we're doing in our poster study. And that's going to help give more value structure to your drawing. So just remembering to keep those separate. So you shouldn't have any, values in the light mass that are darker than the shadow mass, and vice versa. You shouldn't have any tones lighter within the shadow than you have in the light mass. So it's just kind of creating that clear separation and distinction between those two areas. And that's why we do this simplification, the two-tone block in. We're separating our shadow mass from our light mass. And learning to see where those are, you just look for that core shadow. Squinting your eyes at your reference can help you see that. Yeah, kind of the abstract of the planes of the face. Yeah, kind of like the where you just did the 4 values. Um, you have your darkest shadow. You basically have 2 shadow values, a darker and a middle kind of average, and then you have your paper value, and then you have a light value. So you have 4 values. That's kind of your guide for this drawing. Even though we're going to get more value range and details in this stage, you use that poster guide to kind of keep you on track and thinking about the big effect or the big picture. All right, so if any other questions pop up, Linda, just send me an email. All right, Kim, are you with us, Kim? Can everyone else hear me okay? Linda said she lost audio. Okay. Linda, try refreshing. Oh, okay. Okay, good. Okay. All right, Kim. So, really nice job on your drawing. I really didn't have too many suggestions. There were just a few. I would say when you're working in your first layer of your shadow, careful not to go too dark because we are going to do that in the next stage, and also because it kind of commits you to those darks. And also, you might try rubbing out some of the tone a little bit more. You can use a chamois. You can try a chamois if the brush isn't working for you, if the paper's kind of grabbing the charcoal a little heavy. And the main reason for that is I just want to see a little bit more of a flat, even tone so that some of these areas where it's grabbed the charcoal a little too heavily, it's not going to give you any trouble when you try to lift some of the highlights in your shadow. But it's really pretty minor. And that was my only suggestion on this one. Your shapes are spot on, and even your shadow shapes here in the face, you might have gone a little dark here in the mouth, but it'll be easy enough to kind of lift a reflected light and push some of the darks a little darker. And oops. And then, yeah, so, but that was it. And also with the ear here, I would just brush over with it and like a chamois or a brush and kind of even out some of the lighter tones, because right now they're wanting to compete with your light mass a little bit. And I know she had some light on her ear, kind of pulling it out, but I would just find a way to kind of simplify that and let it kind of slowly fall back. You can still have definition in there, but let it fall more into the shadow category. Like I was just mentioning with Linda, and just kind of addressing to everyone, your lighter tones within the shadow mask shouldn't compete with what will be your darker midtones transitioning out of the shadow. So I'm worried that might start to compete a little bit. You could wait if you want, or I wouldn't necessarily tone over it, just smooth it out a little bit and carry some of this tone kind of down, and that should be all for this one. So you're ready to move on to the next step. It looks really, really nice. And since your critique was so short, I'm going to go ahead and go over your profile drawing that you're also working on. So, okay. So the only suggestion I had with this, and it's kind of similar to everyone's, all of your shapes are looking really good. But I would give some context to the tone in the background. And the reason is your paper is a little bit lighter, and so you're probably going to have trouble when you put the white in these areas, getting it to have that pop and that contrast that really helps her face kind of glow. So I would suggest laying in some charcoal into the background. I don't always do this, but with the profile, I would suggest it because it's going to give you that really nice contrast that you need, especially when you go into the white. And you can lay down with vine first and then go into it with a little pencil and then push it in with a brush or your fingers and just try to get, give yourself a nice semi-soft edge along the face so that way when you go in and put your white in, it's not a razor sharp edge. And you don't need to tone the whole background. I know that, at least in the beginning stage, because I know it can kind of get messy and get all over your hands, or you might smear it. But if you just lay in enough for this front section here to here, and then later when your drawing is finished, you can kind of fade that back and fade it out to the edge of the paper. That will be, it'll benefit you now, and also you won't have an issue with messy charcoal. You could even use charcoal powder. Sometimes when I know I have to tone the entire background, it's very tedious to do with a vine charcoal, so I will use charcoal powder in a brush or a chamois, and I'll just kind of buff it into the surface. So you can always switch to some charcoal powder or shave some off from your vine or nitrum with the sandpaper, and then use a brush or chamois to apply it. And in the real tight areas, like when you get into the features and stuff, like in here where it's real tight, then you could use a Q-tip. Those work great. Even though makeup ones that have a real fine kind of point, those work great too. So who knew, right? So yeah, those are all my suggestions. You had a really, really nice drawing going, and I look forward to seeing it fully flushed out. Now I know in the profile view too, everyone who's doing a profile view, her shadow has a lot of reflected light in there, and the reason is when I photographed her, my room was really dark. I had a single light source coming down, but the shadows lost all information, and I didn't want that, so I had put a reflector light, secondary light source, a very dim one, into the shadow. So you will need to darken some areas, especially the core shadow, and then look for where you can push some of the value range in that part of the shadow mask. The Edge Pro Gear charcoal sack. No, I haven't, Kayla. I've heard of it. It's kind of like that little pouch that's full of charcoal powder, and you kind of pounce it on the surface. I've never used one, but I know a couple of artists who do. I'm sure it's pretty handy. It seems like it might be a little hard to get into some of the tight areas, but I'd like to try one out sometime. You can make one too. They're pretty easy to make. Yeah, Kim, my paper is around a value 5. Maybe the photo is just coming out a little bit light in your photos, the photo of your drawing. I know that can happen sometimes. So what I would do is kind of test, let me see, did you send me a little schematic of your poster study where you did the value scale on the paper? I can't remember. I might not have pulled it in here. But if you're laying down white and it shows up and it really pops on the paper in person, then you won't need to tone your background. I mean, you can. It's optional. It's going to give you even more contrast to work with that background. But if you find that your paper's dark enough and you can get enough range with your white, then to kind of help make it distinct from the background, then I wouldn't worry about it too much. Yeah, my paper is around a value 5 or so. It might be a little darker. I'd have to pull out like an official scale. Okay, yeah, you had sent it to me. Okay, so it's probably fine. But use your best judgment, and if you have any questions, just let me know. If your white feels like it stands out enough, then you probably won't need to add any tone to the background. But you still could if you wanted to kind of push that contrast a little further. But really, really nice job. Do you have any other questions, Kim? Yeah, I think adding a little bit of tone in the background, it'll give you that extra kind of push. In the other images, it's not necessary because her hair is pretty dark and there's a little bit of light hitting the backdrop. But when I moved to the side to get the profile photo, that back area of the backdrop was really, really dark. It wasn't getting much light, so it really kind of pushed the contrast there in the picture. All right, really nice job, Kim. All right, Kayla, you are up. Yeah, I didn't have many suggestions for you. What you see here is just about it. So again, I think the same thing, and I can't tell if your photo turned out light too for the photo you're sending me, but if your paper is around a value 5 and your white charcoal is standing out on it well enough, then you probably won't need to add a little tone in the background, but you can if you want that added contrast. My only suggestion, let's see, here in the hair, right here, your shape is a little generic. I would watch, sometimes when we're drawing an area and it's kind of nondescript, like the hair edge, sometimes we'll kind of rely on drawing almost from our head more than actually observing what's happening, and we'll make these generic kind of repeat shapes. And so nature always has more variation than that. So I would look at maybe pushing this back a little more straight and then having one or two maybe curls of different sizes coming forward. I know she had one kind of major one that caught a little bit of light. So I would just watch those generic shapes a little bit and add a little bit of variation to that. Here in the face, your shadow shapes are almost exactly what they need to be. The only thing I was going to mention was there is a distinction between the value here and the value in this shape here. And the cast shadow could be a little bigger, but this value shape is really the main shadow shape, and this is more a dark mid-tone, which is fine because you can leave that darker tone here. I would just soften the edge along here and here. Tap along the edge with the kneaded eraser and lift a little bit of the tone. And also, just as a rule of thumb for front-facing light and you're doing a profile, it's easy to make this edge razor sharp because we do have a kind of a bony mass there coming to the surface. There might be a slightly sharper edge here, but it should have a slight kind of turn or roundness. So I would just open up the light shape a little bit more to give yourself room, because you need to be able to apply white without it touching this area. So you might maybe pull the shadow or this midtone back a little bit to more here, then apply the white, and then leave a gap here for the paper tone. And then when it comes into the eye shape, your shadow shape here is good. So I don't think you really need to change much there. Just recognize that that darker shape kind of ends. In here, I felt like she needed a bigger cast shadow from her lash line. So just increase the size of that shape, and her lower lid actually opens up a little bit lower. The shadow, form shadow on the lid is a little lower, and then you have the cast shadow there. So that was my suggestion there. And moving into the mouth, really not that big of a difference. Your placement for the mouth is pretty good. She just has a larger cast shadow down here for on the lower lip, and a lot of people kind of missed that. So just you can tone that in as part of this shadow mask. It's all kind of one shape. And then I think this just needs to push out a little bit here at the bottom. Just push that shape a little bit more sharply out here. And the size of your cast shadow shape was pretty good. It does have a little bit of an opening of light through here, and she has a little bit of a triangle of tone right there. Okay, so really minor stuff, but you did a really nice job on this. Hi Daniela, welcome. It's okay, as soon as the live stream is over, you'll be able to kind of scrub back and listen to the first half and listen to some of the early Q&A that we talked about. You're welcome, Kayla. Do you have any other questions? All right, good job. I look forward to seeing your drawing develop. All right, Johnny, I know you hadn't quite have, you're drawing up to the stage and with the tone, so just send me an email when you do have your drawing developed. I know you've been working long hours, so just send me an email when you're ready for some feedback. And you're just in time, Daniela. I'm just about to open up your critique, so luckily you made it here in time. Okay, so yeah, good job on your toning. Nice simple shapes. That's exactly what we want. The value seems just right. And you have enough separation between the hair and the neck values, and I can still see your outline, so you're right on cue. There were just a few minor changes that I'd like to suggest. The first one being down here in the chin. I think it could be that you kind of lost your tones a little bit or lost the edge here, but I would just make sure you bring that chin down enough so that she has enough space here, because right here is where the shadow is, and I think you had sloped that back. Yeah, see, your slope is kind of like this. So just bring that down, and then I would open up this shadow down here just a little bit to give a little more light space, so that when we go into the midtones, you'll have room to shade your transitions. Your cast shadow could also come down on the neck just a little bit. And then looking here at the nose, really minor changes. It's mostly the placement of the light shape here. So she has a little shadow, and there's her shadow edge. So I think you might have added too much tone in this area. The wing of the nostril here is actually in the light. And then her cast shadow, just push that corner, that edge over. The lowest point should be in line with the peak of the dip in the cupid's bow of the mouth. and then just look more carefully at this cast shadow shape from underneath the nose. And that was it. You did a really nice job, and you're ready to move on to the darker toning. So do you have any questions, Daniela? You're having trouble with the nose. Yeah. Yeah, so just make a little bit of those changes and it'll lock right into place. Like this was just a little bit wide. I think your shadow shape just got a little generic. So, but your placement of the nostril looks good here. Just careful not to make that too wide. All right. It kind of feels that way, but actually when I checked it with the reference, it's not. It could be that maybe you're bringing this out too soon. Maybe it's too rounded. She has a little bit more of a point, so you could probably maybe straighten that out a little bit. But what I would do, and this kind of applies to everyone, when you start, you don't have to worry about it now, but when we start going in and adding white, whenever we have a contour line that we drew in charcoal, we're probably going to end up lightly erasing that or just making it a little bit softer so that when we add the white's going to be more up the center of the nose or wherever the lighting is hitting. I think her highlights around there. And then this line is going to be just a very, very light kind of indication so that just for us, we're not going to leave it a line there because what's going to happen is there's going to be light on this cheek here that's going to hit up against the mid-tone of the nose and create that edge for us. So when we get to that point, that line probably won't make her nose feel so big. That's okay, Johnny. Don't worry about it. Just get it to me whenever you can. I know you're busy. All right, Daniela, really nice job. If anything comes up as you're working, just let me know and send me an email or a message. Your tones look great. All right, Diana, you are up. I don't know if you're in here with us this morning. I know you're taking a lot of classes right now. You're welcome, Daniela. Good job. So Diana, really nice job. I like your little poster study up here in the corner. I didn't have many suggestions. Everyone's drawings are really at that point where I don't have too many suggestions, but since you're doing a profile, like I mentioned in the other videos, I would place a little bit of a tone behind her. Don't worry about placing it all around. If you're worried about the drawing getting kind of messy, I would just place it right along the front planes of the face just to give you some context for your light mass. And then same suggestion is make sure your shadow shapes here are darker and just make sure you've opened this shape up enough for the shadow. This is her shadow shape here. And you can leave this tone. I would just open up this light shape. Make sure you have enough room so that when you put the white in, it's not going to hit this mid-tone. This tone here it depends on your paper, but it could end up being just the mid-tone of the paper. And you add white here and you add white here. So just take a look at that and open up that shape a tiny bit. And that's pretty much it. Good job. Everything looks pretty good. I would bring this part of the hair shape forward, and I know it's a little confusing because her ear kind of shows and it kind of doesn't. So what I would do is just reshape that so we're not expecting to see an ear and maybe break up the edge with a little bit of a curl. You know, you can bring it lower, or you could even bring the hair mass just forward a little bit more, a little different from the photo. Sometimes when I have a weird tangent, this is called a tangent here, where something kind of confusing, like it follows the shape of her ear, but it's not her ear. that can be confusing to the viewer, so I will often alter my drawing from the photo when I have situations like that. So you might think about what you want to do. You could just bring the hair forward and cover up that section of the ear, and that would be perfectly fine as well. Okay, yep, good job. All right, Beth, you are up. Are you with us, Beth? Excuse me. Where I live, we've been surrounded by fires and from all angles. We have fires in Yosemite, and there's a fire up in Northern California, and the fires in Orange County, and we're in the valley in the middle, and we're getting all the smoke. So our air quality's just been awful, and I could feel it in my throat a little bit. All right, Beth, so I'm not sure if you're with us. I haven't seen you in here just yet, but yeah, I do. I have to. I have to go outside. But it's a little better lately, but there were a few days when it was really smoky. Okay, Beth, so I don't have too many suggestions for your drawing. I really like your little value study here. You did a great job. My only suggestion, and this is something I realized I did in my little demo, I didn't leave enough of a gap for the mid-tone of the paper. So my suggestion would be to, hold on, let me bring up that layer, is to add a layer of that mid-tone there it goes. The layer was hidden. So yeah, I would just erase a little bit and make sure you have that mid-tone kind of in there, and there's going to be a little bit of it on this side too, because the light is coming pretty much from the front, and so we have our light source coming in kind of from the front angle, and it's going to hit these middle areas first, and then as the form wraps back and back this way, we're going to get more mid-tone and shadow. So just pay attention to that when you work on your drawing. So let's go into your drawing here. So there were just a few suggestions I had. I would flatten out the cheek shape here just a little bit and open up the chin and bring that dark shape down a little bit lower. The main reason is we need room to transition out of that shadow, and if you have to carry mid-tone up this way, you're going to run out of room of light. So open that up a little bit and bring that shadow down. Same thing along this edge. This line is going through the center of the core shadow, so that way we have plenty of room to bring our midtones over on the face. And sometimes that will also depend a little bit on your value of your paper. If you're working on a very, very dark paper, they have really, really dark grays, you might not need, you might need to push your shadow back a little further, your core edge, and allow the paper to play a role as part of the shadow. It just depends on your paper. So going into the nose, here in the white, this is the only suggestion I have is to bring that cast shadow open a little bit and make sure you've brought her nose over far enough to the left. It felt a little bit straight here, and it should just kind of pull out just a little bit on that left side. And then same thing going here in the eye, just push that lid up and open a little bit, and it'll help it match the same curve that we see here in this eye. Okay, it's a real minor change, but then you're going to be ready to start your tone. Now, your tone might have gotten a little dark. It's a little hard to tell. If you feel like it is a little dark and it's hard to go darker, I would just take a chamois or a larger brush and just brush over this in this direction. It'll help kind of conceal some of these horizontal lines as well. Also, it'll help prepare you for the next stage where we detail the hair. You're going to be needing to lift and erase some of these tones, so in the lightest areas. So just lightening up your dark mask a tiny bit. It could just be the contrast to your paper as well. So, but that's it. It looks really good. Good job. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. All right, Carolina, are you with us? All right, I'm going to go ahead and just start. If you're with us, Carolina, just pop in and say hello in the chat. Yeah, your drawing looks really nice. Let me pull up my suggestions. They're pretty minor ones. Here in the hair, I would just fill out this area here towards the back. Just mostly in this section. It feels like it pinches a little bit too much. And just double check your hair shape here. It feels like yours is pulling back, but that could just be a slight tonal difference. The main thing I saw here was that this was dipping too low. So bring that shape up a little more flat and then merge it in with the ear. And same thing on the left side of the hair. I would just bring this out a little bit fuller. You'll see when you go into the new videos, we're going to talk about rendering the hair, and I actually rendered this side first. So you'll want to pull that out into the to the left a little bit more. Okay, so here with the left side of the face too, I felt like it was a little narrow, and it's really small, but I would just make sure you pull this brow out a little further than the cheek. Yours were pretty in line with each other. That's more important than pulling the cheek out this much. It's a very small difference. So I would make sure you pull this brow ridge out a little bit and push the forehead out a very small amount. She just has a little more fullness and roundness down here. And you should be able to do that with a pencil eraser pretty easily. Just kind of lift out some of the tone you laid in the hair. The main issue I saw was with the foreshortening on this eye here on the left. And I think one of the reasons is because you had such a narrow space here before that you actually had the correct spacing from the edge of the face to the front of the eye. But because this was too far to the right, you pushed the eye over and it got a little short. So once you open up this left side of the face, I would just bring this over a tiny bit. It's really small, but it's going to help with matching the size between the eyes and the perspective. And then I know it's a little tough to see in some of the references, like the difference between the tear duct and the upper rim of the eye, but just make sure you didn't drop that too low and too far to the left. It looks a little large for the spacing here. So just shorten that up about to there, and and open up the bridge of the nose. I think your tone kind of came over too far and it was pushing this a little too narrow. So remember, there's that keystone shape that opens up in this area. So that was it. Really minor changes. Your drawing's looking great, and those should be easy to implement before you move into the next tonal stage. Really nice job. Everyone has done such a great job. And Hugh, when you are ready, just send me an email with your pictures. I know you've been having a little hard time keeping up with the videos and your back and everything, so just please take care of yourself. No back injuries from drawing, please. And just send me an email when you're able to get to a point where you need some feedback. All right, everyone, you guys did such a great job. I'm really proud of you all, and your drawings are looking great. I'm really excited. The next 2 weeks, there's quite a bit of video coming at you. This week, we have 2 more weeks of videos, and then we're going to have a final critique after that. So we have 2 more weeks of videos, 3 more critiques, if I'm counting right. And so this week we're going to do hair, texture, and shadows. And then there's one whole video on that, and then there's a whole video on rendering the shadow mask. And next week we go into midtones and detail and adding the white charcoal. So, and that video is quite long also. I think it's almost 2 hours, so it's going to be a lot of information. So I hope this week was a little bit of a welcome break. I know it wasn't too much information, but the week before was a lot as well. Does anyone have any last minute questions you'd like to ask? Could be about anything art related. You know, I know some of you were trying out a couple of the papers I recommended, and you didn't like some, and you liked some better. You know, cardstock is my favorite, but I recommend just trying them out. You know, I've tried a lot of different papers, and whenever I discover a new one at the art store, I usually pick up a sheet to just try it out, because you never know when they'll come up with something that works just for the technique that you want to, you know, keep working in. And, you know, the Canson papers can be a little grabby in terms of the charcoal. Some people don't have a problem on them, and some people do. It kind of depends on what materials you're using on it as well. I like that paper because it's very durable, and it can handle a lot of erasing in the beginning stages. Okay, so Nora asked, do you fix your drawing after it is finished? Sometimes it changes the values. I hate fixative. I wish they would come up with something that works, but I don't use it on the two-tone technique, and I've never found the need for it. But one of the reasons I don't use it on the two-tone technique is because the white charcoal will kind of disappear. It's kind of like pastel. If any of you have worked in pastel and you spray your drawing, it darkens it, and the lighter areas kind of disappear. That's going to happen with the white chalk. So do not spray your drawing. And you shouldn't really need to, because the papers grab the grab the charcoal really well, and we're burnishing it into the surface of the paper with a brush. And so you shouldn't really need to use a fixative. I've had some really bad accidents with fixative where I've sprayed a drawing after I sold it, and because they wanted it sprayed, and then it sputtered and left a bunch of dark dots all over my white chalk, and I had to go in and touch those up by hand. So I just, ever since that happened, I stopped using it. There are some that are made for pastel that are a little bit lighter mist, and you can experiment with those, but yeah, I hate the stuff. It's stinky and kind of toxic too. Yeah, this, with the white chalk, you know, I've had it, I did a drawing with this technique, but on panel, and I had a gray panel that I was using, and I sprayed fixative over it, and all my whites disappeared. It was like watching them just completely dissipate. It was a nightmare. So I had to go back in and redo my light masses. So don't use the fixative on these if you can get away with it. Just put your drawing, you know, in a matte a frame with a mat, or if you just need to stack them and store them, put a piece of tracing paper over your drawing and tape it into place. Yeah, it just evaporated. It was awful. So yeah, if you need to just stack your paper in like a portfolio, place a little piece of tracing paper over the surface, tape it into place so it won't shift around, and then place it in a flat file or your flat portfolio, and it will be just fine. It shouldn't rub off. You shouldn't have any issues with that. What you could do, though, if you're worried about the darks lifting, because they will sometimes with the vine or the nitrum, they'll kind of dust away. You could spray your drawing after you're done with the dark mass before you add the white mass. That is a possibility. So I don't personally do that, but that wouldn't hurt your drawing any. So long as you have a new can with a clean nozzle and it doesn't sputter all over your drawing. There was one other question I thought had come up, and I'm trying to remember what it was. What was it? I am blanking. If I think of it, I will let everyone know. It had something to do with... Well, it wasn't in the chat. No, it was a question that had come up from earlier. Well, if I think of it, I will let you guys know. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me this morning, and I hope you guys are enjoying the class. All of the new videos are up and ready to watch, so you guys can head over to the Kajabi website and log in and watch your new lessons. All right, thank you, and I'll see you guys next week, and I'll see you on Facebook. You're welcome. Oh, it's not putting up with you guys. You guys are really fun to work with. I'm really happy to have you guys. Everyone's doing such a great job. I'm really proud. And thank you guys for being patient, because I know this is not an easy technique. It is a slow process. So thank you for your patience and trusting me with the process. And yeah, you guys are all doing really, really well. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.